So, Dubliners by James Joyce is a 1914, um, although Joyce attempted very much to publish it way earlier. I think I think he finished writing kind of the whole thing early, I think like around 1900s. I want to say we're in 1904, 5, when he was a young man himself living in Dublin and eager to get out because he was like famously, I think I did one other Joyce review, which is The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, which took place, his talk, kind of a Bildungsroman kind of Joyce as a young poet, artist, really just trying to get out of, of this staunch, very constricting Irish Catholic, which you can imagine is just very, the way he like describes those sermons of like the vicars and the priests and that kind of fear. Still, it's trying to instill kids with the fear of death. It really was what he was trying to get away from and trying to go to a place of creative freedom, which was mostly, I think, like Zurich, Switzerland, is where he died. I'm not sure if he, but I'm sure he probably went over the world. So, Dubliners concerns a very interesting selection of 15 short stories that are centering around kind of like it's almost like in a chronological order of life to death, starting out with, I think, early things about like childhood and little stories that kind of have these parochial view into the clammy streets of Dublin, and like the poverty too is like a big thing, and themes of epiphany too amid the mundane. Like you get a lot of people with eureka moments throughout Dubliners, tons of characters, even the most unseemliest kind of people, like drunkards and people at wine at parties, like especially near the end, the dead. Lots of people have those moments of profound realization that they're like, wow, which I thought was interesting. So James Joyce, he wrote this, and he was actually not really a fan of Dublin at all. Like as far as Ireland, he did, it was just completely, just horribly run. I think there was the introduction I read. I actually bought the book. Fun fact: actually bought the book when I was in Dublin myself, visiting there with a couple of my family, with my brother and sister. 2019, I think it was late, and it was like, I was like, oh well, I go to a bookshop, and I was like, oh, let's see if they have James Joyce, and I hadn't read him at the time yet, except maybe like a little bit of Ulysses, and then I didn't. That was like kind of my first attempt, kind of timid attempt into the venturing down the rabbit hole, but I ended up not really reading Ulysses until a couple years later, which I'll try to review. I just need give me a solid hour of time when I'm not running out of steam, like after these. Like when I'm not working, like today was like, even though it's part-time, it's still like, kind of fogs my memory a little bit more than usual. But no, I do like Joyce. But he's like a fine kind of like Guinness. It's been kind of like born into, like a chaotic kind of like means, like a very kind of turbulent, and even though James Joyce, like he did, kind of, with the seedy underbelly of Dublin, he almost had a kind of moral inquiry, like a moral code of like this is wrong, like don't do that. Like there was like, I think the city was horribly run by this Parnell guy, blanking on his name, but I think it was probably like, this is like late 1800s, early 1900s, and he just like didn't like follow through on his plan, like on his promise of like trying to get rid of poverty and find work for like the poor of Dublin. And this is pretty much this story, Dubliners, is basically a paean to those poor people in a very, almost a sense of Dostoevsky's love of the poor people, or Charles Dickens' kind of indictment against those industrialist workers of the day. And it starts out, we have the list of stories here, starting out with the sisters, which concerns a priest that dies, and then this young kid who ends up finding out from stories of his friends that the father wasn't as kind of as all he was cracked up to be. Like he wasn't as holy as he was. Again, those are those realizations, and then there's an encounter where there's a couple of schoolboys who are skipping school pretty much, and then that kind of cuts short when they encounter this random kind of just obscene older guy that kind of hectors them a little bit and kind of scares them off. Then there's Araby, I think. That's probably my favorite one off this. Is probably a lot of the cluster of stories you always get is probably like The Dead, Araby, maybe Eveline, and A Little Cloud, I think. And like I said, these are, it's a quick read. I think it's, people expect it to be kind of as big as Joyce, but it's probably like, I'd say like maybe less than a week or a few days read, really. I mean, the longest one on here is probably the last one. I think it's the Dead. I think that's like so it classifies, I think, as like kind of a short story, or I'm sorry, a novella of its own. But then there's Two Gallons, and The Boarding House, and then A Little Cloud, Counterparts, Clay, which is about Maria, who's works in a kitchen, and is like, again, you're getting kind of the progression of life as it goes on. How you're focusing on on a younger woman, whereas like the it starts out really, so it's like it almost seems like a little bit random. Like that's what I thought, was like, it's like Joyce is picking kind of just random little things, incidents around Dublin, in the same way that you know Ulysses takes place in one day in Dublin, but in kind of encompasses all these different kind of people's inner lives, and the kind of magic there is to them amid the boredom of looking for work and trying to find food, but it's actually tied together under a theme of death, life and death, and his writings are really good. It can be a little bit flowery at times, but I think his writing is like very. There's one, I don't know if it was from The Mother, but there was one where he's describing like a funeral, and like how it was from the point of view of like a younger man who's just like very taken aback by this death, but at the same time he can't really find the words to process this grief, and he's just like, she was like alive yesterday, and now there's a brilliant version on Audible I listened to by Andrew Scott, the actor, and he did a great job because he himself obviously is Irish, was clear as day, and yeah, he kind of hit every note kind of in the way that I wasn't expecting. I was like, whoa. So, I thought, I was like a little bit like, oh, he's retained that accent very much, very in all the little quirks and the stuff of the language, or I'm sorry, of the parlance. And then so Clay, and then A Painful Case, and then there's kind of instances of shame too, like with Mr. Duffy in A Painful Case, and then Mrs. Sinico, he's finding out years later that the latter, or no, that he condemned her to be lonely and to die basically, like he's finding out all these years later. Just a lot of bitterness in some of these things. Ivan, A Painful Case. Okay, so that, and then Ivy, A Day in the Committee Room, which is about a bunch of canvassers. Oh, and also they start talking about, yeah, they Charles Purnell, that's his name. Charles Stewart Purnell, that's his name. They start talking about him, like his memory and like his faulty memory, I guess, which I guess is obviously a dig against him, kind of maybe just the politics at the time. And then there's A Mother, which is probably one of my favorite ones. There's this Irish revival going on, and there's a Mrs. Kearney, and then Kathleen trying to like plan to tend to her concerts. I think she's like a singer or a musician, and they're, you know, but it's like, yeah, but um, it's all in vain though. Like she can't convince anybody to go, so it's like kind of sad. That's a big thing too. It's like the one about the boy that's trying to impress his sister, I think, or a girl he likes, and he ends up going to a store to try to find. This is earlier on, obviously, because it's youth, and he's trying to find something to buy for her, and then but it turns out all the stores kind of like, this is probably like maybe the shopping mall of the day, all the stores are closing, and then everybody's too tired, so he kind of like abandons his mission in the middle of it, and then and then you know, defeatedly comes home. And then there's Grace. It's about this one Irish guy, obviously all of them are, but Mr. Kiernan is gets drunk at this kind of social gathering, and then a bunch of his friends gather around to try to get him to reform him. Just like, I thought that was kind of funny. And then the Dead, which is basically another gathering party with the Gabriel Conroy, the main character. Starts, he has an epiphany suddenly and starts telling about, his youth and death and life and the tragic kind of end of it all. And he goes on for quite some time, and it's kind of hard because I thought at some point that it was separated, like it was a different story all of a sudden, because like the length of the other stories kind of paled in comparison to this one. But yeah, that's all in all very unique sense of, like, class divisions, or not so much class divisions, but they're still kind of echoing, not as much kind of bile of the religious kind of patriarchy, I suppose, but a lot more kind of focusing on the small life, the everyday life of, which is a pleasant type of thing. There's not like a biting sense to it. There's some bitterness and stuff here and there, but you can tell like Joyce is trying to like truly understand these type of people. Like, he grew up with these people, and you can tell it's very much like a realist kind of. Even though as far as I know, Joyce is classified as modernist, but I think like this, and I'd say like maybe Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, that kind of these kind of differs. So yeah, so James Joyce, I definitely recommend Dubliners. Quick read, and yeah, thanks for watching.